Okay, here I have our multimelta, and multimeltas basically shoot invisible death rays. Now, how are we going to make an invisible death ray? Well, there you go, I'm finished. However, if you don't want to be quite as lazy as that, we're going to start by making some spheres and using autogrid a bit. So, here's one. Just make sure it's in the right position. And I'm going to hemisphere it to about 0.5. And then I'm going to change its segment count all the way down, probably to about 4 or 5. Not a lot. Virtually nothing. Maybe 6 even. There you go. Convert editable poly. I'm going to bring down its friend here. Now I brought that down in view. Should probably bring that down in local actually. So change this to local. And I'm just going to drag this down until it's in the right position, which is here. Okay, now I'm going to rename this one, which is our emit. And this is also going to be an emit. Okay, and these are going to emit our lovely multimelta stuff. Now the first thing I need to do, well, is attach these two together, like so. And I'm going to, actually no, I'll keep them separate, so we're going to have emit and emit 2. There we go. Just so I know what they are. And I'm going to link these to our gun so that basically they move when the gun moves, as you can see, which is kind of important. Okay, next I'm going to set up a particle system. Now you may notice obviously we already have our old particle system which is operating our flamethrower. I'm going to delete that and I'm going to build us a new one, for which we need, well, there's a couple of things we can do. We can start with an empty flow. So let me see, standard flow, here we go. Drag that up here, and this builds us this particle flow system right the way down here, yeah? Now I prefer to build the particle flow system onto the front of the gun so I can see where it is. Let's just delete this again, just because I'm feeling lazy. And also so I know where the particle system is when I need it. There we go, just draw it out the front of this. There we are. And I'll link it as well. So that's a bit like a badge really. There you go. Okay, and I'm going to flip it over just 180 degrees. Okay, and at the moment, as you can see, it disgorges and vomits its particles willy-nilly absolutely everywhere. Okay, now the actual birth for our particles is going to be from frame 220 through to frame whatever the hell that is. Let's have a look. 220 to 271. So, get rid of this dead one that we're not going to be using over here. Move this one over to here and give it a name. Melter. Rename this one. Shoots invisible light. Awesome. Okay, what we're going to do here then is change its birth from 220 to 270. Like so. So now, when it gets here, is when it will launch its amazing particles. Next, we're going to position object instead of position icon, and we're going to add from a list emit 1, like so. Okay, and what we can do is just shift and drag. There we go. Let's make a copy of that. And we can make 2 instances, and we can position object 2, remove and add by list, emit 2, or we can just add emit 2 to this. As you can see, they both work, so the option's there for you. Now, let me see, speed along icon arrow, position object, location, pivot on both. So now it's just firing straight out the middle. Okay. Now the shape at the moment is a tetra, but we're going to need to do some shape instancing. So what I'm going to do is build myself a shape that we can use for our gun. And this is going to be a spline circle, which I'm just going to pull out to about here. And I can mess with the actual overall shape of the spline circle once I've built it. Okay, next, position, speed, rotation, shape. Here we are. So shape instance. Pick our geometry object, and it's now this. And we're going to display geometry. As you can see, we now have this delicious array of these, which is made into a geometry object, obviously. Rotation, speed, shape, follow. And we can change the orientation just on the Y here to 90 degrees. Do a quick render and you'll see that we have a mass of plates currently coming out of this. Convert this to an editable spline. And if we make it enabled in renderer and viewport, it no longer has to basically dick around making it into this plate-like shape, so we get these rings instead. Alright, so we've got our funky rings. Next, we're going to change the scale of these fellows. So here's the scale which controls our particle size. And in here we can change our overall scale to one that's going to work for us a bit better, like that. We can also change our birth. Now if we're only doing 50, then perhaps we only need 100 particles to come out. There we go. Now as you can see, they're being divided fairly evenly between the two objects that they're being emitted from. And we don't want them to inherit our emitter movement, otherwise they're going to jerk and shoot around in a very unpleasant kind of manner. Okay, so there's our exciting death ray shooting out of here at the moment. So let's see what we can do now to make it look a bit better. And what I'm going to do is change the scale. Now we can change the scale here to things like relative successive. If we do that, then we can change it over time. Say by particle age. There we go. Let's get our particles together. There we go. So as you see, this will allow us to add variation to our particles if we choose to. Okay, let's keep it like that. Now the multimelta is a short-range weapon, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it so that we get some fall-off from this after a point in time. So this is basically going to be shooting these out, and they're going to get smaller and weaker over time. So what I'm going to do is make it relative successive. If I bring this up to about 100, okay, you can see what it's doing now. So basically over time, this is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. For this to work successfully, I'm going to have to bring down the radius of our original reference object a bit. Just open this up, select all its splines. If I just scale it, you see, it's not going to work. I have to actually scale down the individual splines like that. Alright. Now, these, which are our exciting glow-in-the-dark kind of things, if I just quickly render them, they don't particularly look very exciting at the moment as they zoom out. So what I need to do is give them some funky trails. Now, I can actually create trails off these if I was to choose to. So let's see how that would look if I was to go to Scale, Spawn. Okay, now at the minute, as you can see, they're all spawning 1 constantly. So in our spawn, let's make it so that we're going to spawn another one of these. So I'm going to use my shape instance. There we go. For our shape instance, again, we're going to use the object down here, like so. And for display geometry. Now at the minute we're just creating like loads and loads of magical flying saucers, which, you know, is okay I suppose, but let's see, spawn, speed inherited is going to be 0. So at the minute it's just spawning them all over here. And let's see, no variation, no inherited. Now per second, what I'm going to do is do a spawn. Now I've got to be very careful how I do this. I'm going to come all the way back to our first particle. Per second we're going to spawn 3. Okay, so it's leaving these behind at the moment. Or we can make it by travel distance. Make the step size maybe 3. And you can see how many it's producing here at this point. Change that to 6. There we go. Basically every one of these particles is going to produce one of these every 6th step. Spawnable 100%, an offspring we can change, but we'll keep it at 1. Okay, now in this one we'll apply scale again. Okay, and in our scale, which is currently overwrite once, I'm going to change this to, and for this I better change my display as well to none, so we're only seeing our new stuff. In scale here I'm going to have relative successive. And this will allow us basically to bring these down like this. So it's creating these trails behind it as it goes. What else can we do with this then? Let's turn display back on. Okay, so we can see what it's doing. And we'll give it an age test. And once our particle age inside this event is greater than 30, with a give or take of 5, we can kill it. And this means it will have a lot less rendering, well, a lot less kind of, particles going on. There we go, you can see them being generated now. Now it's really slow, the speed this is being shot at, so let's increase the speed. At the minute, speed is 300, which is retardedly slow when you consider that we're dealing with light here. See how fast a 3000 will do it for us. Okay, as you can see, it's shooting at a few particles. Now let's see where the deaths for the particles are kicking in. Got to be careful, you see. The particles are going to have to stop generating after a certain age. So our initial state particles need to be reduced as well. So let's put age test and die. There's one. And we'll put another age test over here. And in this age test, this will be event age. And we don't need much, so maybe 15 frames. And after 15 frames, this will be killed as well. So just put another delete one here. This will allow us to heavily reduce the amount of particles in our system. Now, at the speed they're going, let's reduce that even more. There we go. So now they're only coming out that far. Okay, that's not bad. Now we're certainly going to get some good blur on that, but we might need to crank up the birth on these a little bit as well. Let's see what a birth of 300 does for this. And do a quick render. Well, we know that this is too many particles now for the system, so what I'm going to do instead is just press 6 and let's crank these down to about 150. So you can see now the particles are being created. Coming through in steps. Let's just check our spawn on this. Just really narrow this out a bit so there's slightly less particles being generated. Okay, that looks like slightly better. And I'll save this as Workbench again, because obviously, as you can tell, we had a crash because it ran out of memory. Okay, let's see how that is. Mental Ray does run out of memory. Pretty bad sometimes. As you can see at the minute, our virtual is 741, our physical is 618. If you're starting to get out of memory errors a lot and you need to test your scene, just drop in a scanline. Scanline's a lot less memory intensive. It can render literally just about anything. Alright, that's not bad. It's only pretty, I'll give it that. Okay, so what about blurs and stuff? Well, let's give it a material first. So, we drop into our material editor. We're going to give it a ray trace, which we need to name as blue light of doom. And in the diffuse, we're going to make it blue. Okay, specular colour, none. Same goes with glossiness, completely matte. Transparency. Drop that down a bit more. Its index of refraction is too high. Change that, sorry I mean too low, change that to about 2.5. What 10's like? 2.5. Right, don't want any glossiness. Transparency's fine. Self-illumination, which is our luminosity. Do that. Then apply. Then we wait. We wait. Yes, we wait. What do we wait? This sometimes takes a few moments. Okay, got to stick this material in the old Menkel array. I mean, in the particle system. Material, just a static one. And I'll just drag it across. There we go. Now you can see it's affecting them. I'll just pause while this renders. That's not bad. Probably could do with being a bit lighter though. So there we go. Change this lighter. Probably crank the luminosity up a bit. And we can stick an output in the diffuse if you want as well. The thing that's going to really sway this is going to be a bit of motion blur though. So motion blur is a really good way of slowing your scene down to the point where you're going to cry. Just stick a second camera in here. And select my camera. And we can add some motion blur. There we go. 12 passes. That seems okay. Duration in frames. Well, it depends. If I'm just going to render this, I'm going to make it 1.5 frames. That way we're going to get some good blur. Because this is moving real fast. Okay, so this is the point where I'm going to render a frame and pause. Okay, so as you can see, we've got basically our lights going on here. Sorry, not our lights, our effect going on here. What we need to do, all I've done by the way is I've hidden the actual emitter here. What we need to do now is actually apply some sort of a glow to this, which we can do in Mental Array. So what I'm going to do, just close this down, and again, we're going to reduce the amount of particles that we're spawning, simply because it's going to eat an awful lot of our memory. It's also trying to organize this. So this is shoot non-visible light. This should be renamed as kills original particles. This one is particle trails. Kills particle trails. Okay. Let's have a look at this, see if I can just cut down the amount of birth we've got here. We've got an amount of 150, let's knock that down to 100. That'll give us slightly less for a start. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so 100 are being produced in that period between 220 and 270. In actual fact, I think only 50 should be produced, really, because it's only kicking 50 times. So let's change that again. Let's come back a bit. I'll just delete this camera. Okay. So that's a lot less particles than we had before. Now we've still got our 12 passes on, so if we go to my camera, and I'll just get a camera 2. I'll have to delete a camera 2, so that's okay. That's the one that had the render passes turned on, so we're not going to be using that. I'm going to make sure that we've got mental ray turned on again. Here's mental ray. Down here is one of our tools, so I'm going to assign this to our tools section once I've given it a name. Give it a name, tool multimelta template, because that's what it is. And let me see, I'm going to put this in my tools area. There we go, that's out of my way. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do then is work with the material that we've got here. So if I open my material shader here, now what I'm going to do is in my luminosity here, I'm going to change this, instead of being white, to a glow loom shader. What that's going to do is basically make our object glow or pretty like. I'm going to change my saturation and a few other levels here. Then I can increase the brightness or decrease it as I see fit. So I'm going to make it white to start off with, and then I can start changing the colour a little bit. Now remember, if I'm making it blue, I'm going to need to make it a brighter blue. So there we go, say about 75 on the illumination. There we are. And we can change the surface material too. Let's see, I'll just lighten that up a bit. And the diffuse. There we go. Now if I'm doing that, I still want it to be transparent. Diffuse is still going to stay the same. And I've already, if I press 6, obviously fed this into my material static blues up here. Now bearing in mind this will still take a little bit to render. And we have got depth of field turned off. Let's go all the way in, just to here so we can see what it's doing. And if I go to my exposure control and just put MR photographic on, okay, and I'm going to save this workbench. Okay, and I'm going to pause it and then hit render. Now at the moment you may notice your glow is actually fairly low. This could be down to your scene scale or any number of things. There's an easy way of cranking it up though. So all we have to do really is just drop an output map over here. And in our output map we can actually just increase our output amount. Say 15. And now if you do it, you'll notice that these most assuredly are glowing. Like so. Now if we were to combine that with, for example, a motion blur, just keep the duration at 1 frame for the time being. As you can see, with 1 frame on the duration, you get this effect here, which is more like, you know, a lot of records all standing around doing nothing. You can see the blur occurring over here, where we've got the feedback on the gun, but not on this as such. So let's change the settings on this. So if we were to double the duration in frames, and then hit render, here we go. And you can see how it builds it up as we're going along here now. Obviously you're getting considerably more blur. The problem with this is that you may need to increase the render passes. Just to demonstrate that, if I increase the render passes to 24 and drop the duration in frames down to about 1.5, and I'll just pause it again. So as you can see, you're getting a lot more blur doing it that way, as long as you're decreasing the duration of frames and increasing total passes. So it's all going to be down really to how many frames you think you can get away with doing. For example, if I do 0.5 duration in frames with 12 total passes, you'll see I get pretty much a similar effect. Obviously what we're trying to do is lose the kind of crispy edge around these as much as possible. And these will be animated, which helps. Capiche? Now, let's have a look in our particle system here just for a moment. Check our spawn. So remember, we can reduce this by step size if you want to, but obviously you're creating a lot more particles. As such, okay? Drop this back down to 8, which is what it was. Drop it in perspective, and delete that camera again. It's a nice effect, mind you. Okay, so that's one way of adding a glow into this to obviously affect these things here.